All right, gentlemen, it is a privilege to be here with both of you. And as I hope happens, what happened the other night, this room starts to fill up as we go on. And I know Council Member Callaghan has a meeting tonight in Narragansett, so we'll make sure we wrap up in plenty of time, hopefully by, let's say, 5 till 7. Does that work? That'll give you time to get?
7 o'clock's fine.
7 o'clock's fine, okay. All right, let's do our opening statements. Each of you gets an opening statement, and we'll start with Mark G., your 90-second opening statement.
All right. Thank you, Mark, and members of the audience. Thank you for your invitation to join this discussion. The reason I'm here and running for Rhode Island Senate is due to my disappointment and frustration every time I open up the newspaper or turn on the radio and learn about some deal gone bad, some guy on the take, or some politician who's broken his oath of loyalty and honor to serve. We see the results. We're one of the highest cost states in the nation for citizens, taxpayers, businesses, government, and even dead people if they haven't already moved to Florida. It doesn't have to be that way. We've got tens of thousands of smart, hardworking, honest, dedicated individuals who can lead, and leaders we need. I'd like to be one of them, not for special interests, but to serve you and others like us who just want honest people in government. I bring my experience as an independent thinker, a doer, Naval Vietnam veteran, an IBM Corporation alumnus, a successful small business person for almost 40 years, a father of 7 and a bunch of grandchildren, and a senior citizen, community service, volunteer, and so on. Please help me get Rhode Island back on track.
Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you. I want to thank Elizabeth McNamara from EG News, Mark Curtis, New England Tech, Mr. Lombardi, and of course it's good to see Mr. G again, and the audience, of course. I'm running for office because I want to help make Rhode Island a better place. For too long, our young people have been leaving our state for lack of opportunity. I've seen family and friends move out of Rhode Island because they could not find jobs. That has to end. We need to change the culture of our business community and our legislature by enacting business-friendly statutes and make it easier to do business in Rhode Island, along with real ethics reform. We can start to show they're moving in an honest and right direction. From there, we can show other businesses, other states, and our own citizens that we do actually mean business. We need to attract new business and make sure our current businesses grow and expand in Rhode Island. As our manufacturing jobs dried up years ago, we did nothing. Now we have dozens of empty factories, and unemployment is rampant. As a former prosecutor and current president of the Narragansett Town Council, I made tough decisions, and I will do the same at the State House as a senator. For too long, we have taken the easy way out and failed to plan for the future. I have an infant son at home. I want to try to ensure that someday, if he chooses to, he has the chance to stay here and raise his own family in Rhode Island. I can't guarantee he'll want to stay here. He might be sick of us by then, but at least he and other young kids will have that chance. It's time to make that a reality. It's time for a new generation of leadership for Rhode Island, and I ask for your vote on November 4th. Thank you.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, for your opening statements. I should point out, too, that this is going to be telecast on one of the local public access channels as well as on the East Greenwich News website, so we will get a lot more eyeballs looking at this race in the next 2 weeks before we all vote 2 weeks from tomorrow. We're going to go through a lot of questions. As you both know, I cover the State House extensively, so I'm familiar with a lot of the current issues up there. So we'll go back and forth on the questioning, and since Mr. G started with the opening statements, we'll start with Mr. Callaghan. Let's try and keep these to a minute, and then we'll have a minute to rebuttal, and then if you want to debate a little bit, go ahead, mix it up. First question tonight is, and again to Mr. Callaghan, do you favor repaying the 38 studios bondholders, which may eventually cost taxpayers upwards of $100 million? Do you favor repaying those bondholders? Why or why not?
I think that's really the question of this election in some respects. And I know the easy answer to get a lot of votes is to say no. That's what you can do. That's like a populist opinion. But I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think we have to find out whether not paying back the bonds is going to cost us more money in the long run versus just going after the insurance money. Because if we don't pay it back, and the insurance rates for other bonds, like the ones we have here in East Greenwich, the roads, and Narragansett is too, if the interest rate payment rises because we don't pay back the bonds, because we didn't want to, then we're just hurting ourselves in the long run for the future. So I'm not a bond expert. I don't know if Mr. G is. He might be. I will find that out. I don't know yet what the exact answer is to that question, but I think it's more complicated than a yes or no answer, and I think that we have to explore all of our options, and including pursuing the lawsuit that's currently pending as far as we can go.
Councilor G, your thoughts on the question?
Well, I agree that it's a complicated issue, but I would, and I'm disappointed that we haven't moved faster on getting to the bottom of who did what and when. I think it would help us a great deal if we either had the Attorney General or the committee that was looking into Macbeth and her counterpart to find out exactly who knew what and when. And I'm not, I probably don't feel as bad about calling the insurance company and asking them to bring his checkbook down and write a check to those bondholders, because I'm not intimidated by the rating agencies who want to scare us into thinking that it'll be doom and gloom if we don't pay. I think the legislation was pretty clear. It was not a referendum bond, but a good faith bond. Obviously, we couldn't come through with a good faith, so if push comes to shove, I would ask that the insurance company make good. But I do think we ought to have some answers at some point along the line.
Any rebuttal or other comment? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
I just, in preparation for the debate, I kind of made a list, and I tried to go through and see what people, what leaders in the state do support paying back the bonds and who don't. Just the short list that I retrieved who want to pay it back or at least want to explore the options are Gina Raimondo, Seth Magaziner, the Province Chamber of Commerce, Ernie Almonte, and Speaker Mattiello, just to say a couple. And I know that those people don't want to pay back the bonds. They don't want to spend that money. But for whatever reason, they've found that it may hurt us in the long run. So that's just an example of the thought that's gotten into this thing.
Mr. G, any other thoughts?
No.
All right, next question, and Mark G., this one will begin with you. This is an interesting race because both of you are town council members. What can you do at the State House to bring projects and money back to your particular districts, and be specific on some of the things you'd like to achieve?
Say the first part of the question, please.
Both of you are town council members. What can you do at the State House, if elected, to bring back projects and money to your districts?
Well, I'm not too sure that that would be my philosophy of operating. I really don't see myself as being at the State House to try to procure money for my community. And I think we've got a much larger problem, and that is it has to do with money and the fact that we're over our heads in debt. The budget shows a surplus, but as soon as we open up next year's budget, I'm afraid we're going to see some problems. I think we need some leadership from the General Assembly, from the House Speaker, and working with both sides of the aisle to agree to set some objectives as to what we can do to address our financial difficulties. And I think if we can set an objective and agree that that's what we want to do, then we can sit down and have some meaningful discussions. But this business of opening up a General Assembly session and talking about whether calamari should be the chief topic or that type of thing really doesn't do us any good.
Mr. Callaghan?
Well, I think that just the way this district is designed makes it hard for a legislator like in this district, a senator, to advocate or bring back money for the entire district, because it's parts of 4 towns. A tiny bit of South Kingston, the southern half of Narragansett, generally the western part of North Kingstown, and most of East Greenwich. So I think bringing back money for the district is a priority, but I think it's difficult to, unless you parcel it up piece by piece. I think that a better way to approach it is to try to incentivize towns like Narragansett, North Kingston, South Kingston, East Greenwich to share some services. You can incentivize the towns to do that, then you can possibly encourage some lower property taxes in these towns. I think that's a way that the state has to move statewide, because I think in some respects, the way this district goes, the state goes, because it is so large and it encompasses so many different places and aspects, like Galley, the fishing industry, Slocum is more farming, Main Street, East Greenwich is more, not urban, but it's a variety and diverse district. So I think it has a lot of aspects we have to think differently in a lot of ways.
Well, you raise an interesting point when you talk about, well, I'll use the word, a lot of people don't like to hear it, consolidation of services. And we'll start with you again since you brought it up, and then go to Mr. G. But, they're meeting tonight in Coventry to talk about merging 4 fire districts into one. They used to have 7. I mean, Rhode Island, I believe, has 71 fire districts for 39. I've never seen fire protection done like this anywhere in the nation. Are you talking about backing consolidation for police services, fire services, schools? I mean, what would be on the table in your mind in terms of consolidation or regionalization?
I think it has to be sort of a global look at everything we do. In Washington County, there's the Washington County Regional Planning Council, and it's made up of, I think, 8 different communities. And South Kingston and Narragansett are part of that. And they share services for purchasing and things like that. But we should expand that. Expand to North Kingstown, East Greenwich, South Kingston, Narragansett. Get that moving. And I think the state can be, this district needs leaders who can bring those communities together. And by proposing some sort of incentive from the state to these towns to consolidate some services, whether it's in terms of school, police, fire, purchasing, those kind of things have to be explored, because 39 cities and towns can't repeat the services within 2 miles of each other over and over. It just doesn't make sense. And I think that's been an issue we've been dealing with, and it's been growing for years.
Mr. G?
I heard an idea that was actually put forth by one of the gubernatorial candidates, and it made some sense to me. First of all, I think if we're going to do that, we've got to be focused on a fairly narrow, easily defined problem. And coming to school teacher bargaining sessions is a good example of all these different communities trying to make to get the teacher's contract resolved. I think sitting down with 37 or 38 school districts to try to solve a teacher union discussion is very difficult. One of the suggestions I heard was to sit down, have a single negotiator for the state who sits down with members of the various school departments and school districts and bargains strictly about financial and monetary issues, nothing else but that. Leave the educational issues and so forth out of it. But if we could set up one contract with all of these school districts and have all of the teachers agree to at least the monetary situation, then that to me would make a lot of sense. I think we've got to be careful because Mr. Gorham in Situate or Foster proposed Weskanog, which was a consolidation of 3 different communities, and people got excited. They were freaked out. They thought their towns were going to be dissolved and taken away from them. So I think you also have to be very, very careful about how you approach these things and make sure that people understand what they can and cannot do. So, but consolidation is one thing we've got to look at.
Any rebuttal?
I think Rhode Island, in a lot of ways, has a lot to do with power. Every planning board, zoning board, heritage commission, they all have their little pocket of power and they hang on to it for dear life. And towns are the same way. We're not going to be able to bring people together unless there's some incentive to do something. I think that's where the state might come in. And that's to make people give something up, they have to get something. So I think that's going to be an issue for the future.
Any further thought, Mr. G, or otherwise we'll move on?
I just, the challenge of, for instance, the fire district on which I served, we tried to set up a joint dispatch system with Warwick. I mean, there are next door neighbors, they're right next. Why can't we sit down and have two communities agree on dispatch? Well, unfortunately, we thought we had an agreement, and East Greenwich went ahead and purchased almost $200,000 worth of equipment, which was to be shared with Warwick. And the problem was Warwick kept dragging their feet, and we'd get a report from the chief saying, well, I talked to, chief, and he said, well, it's too early, we've got some other things going on, we got negotiations. This went on for 2 years, and finally it got to the point where let's fish or cut bait because this doesn't make sense. So we said, we're out of here. And so it should have been easy, but the problems that arose were significant.
Let me expand the question and go a little bit larger, because you guys have touched on a couple of things on more specific and more parochial issues. But the state budget projections for the next 3 or 4 years are showing that we might have upwards of a $400 million projected deficit. A lot of this is due to the estimation of gambling revenue being siphoned off from Rhode Island when the 3 casinos and the slot parlor opened in Massachusetts. Tell us what you would do to try and bring the budget to, or create other revenue, because I mean, $300 or $400 million to the Rhode Island budget is a huge chunk to try and replace. And we'll start the answers with Councilor Callaghan.
Well, it's obviously a huge problem we're facing, and it's not the first time. I think back 10 or 12 years ago, there was the tobacco settlement money, and I think we got about $330 million. And one of the gubernatorial candidates at the time was proposing that we use that as a rainy day fund for future issues. Instead, we plugged the budget gap that year with that money. This year will be an extremely difficult budget season, as it is in every town. In Narragansett, we did cut back on some capital projects to fund our undervalued pension. But I think it's going to have to be a global look at the entire budget to see where we can make savings, where we can increase revenues, and it's not going to be easy. I don't have a magic bullet. I don't think anybody does. It's going to take a lot of hard work, but I'm willing to put that in.
Mr. G?
Well, my suggestion would be to call that insurance guy again who sold us the insurance on the 38 Studios bond and ask him to write some checks. But that way we probably clear $100 million of that $300 or $400 million. And once again, I'm not worried, and I'm not intimidated by Goldman Sachs or Fitch or Moody's or Standard & Poor rating service, because frankly, I think they got to be careful about what they say about our bond rating. Resource recovery, what was that, $70 million that just kind of went up in smoke because we made some bad land deals. So to start, we got to stop making stupid decisions and stop following the leader when somebody says march and we just go in lockstep behind the leadership. I think we need some independent voices and some independent thinking in the way we approach these things. I don't know what the revenue estimates are based on the latest figures, but there's no question about the fact that we are in deep doo-doo when it comes to our finances. And once again, we've got to, I would love to think that I could go to the State House and sit down with people on the other side of the aisle and try to work out at least an agreement that we've got some major problems, and are we ready to sit down and decide how to approach them? And if so, how do we fix them? So,
any other thoughts? Okay, here's the next question, and this time we'll start with Mr. G. Getting away from the financial, although this question may bring back some of the financial issues because it's all part of the same thing. Where do you stand on whether or not Rhode Island needs to hold a constitutional convention? Why or why not?
oh boy, that's a hot topic. Well, first of all, I think we should have a constitutional convention. I don't share some of the hysteria that has been promoted by certain special interests that it's a gateway to problems and we'll get ourselves into a lot of trouble. It's a perfectly transparent situation, hopefully, and a lot of that has to do with how we select the delegates. And if we send a bunch of people from the State House up there who are already involved in government, then I'm not sure we'll have the best approach to making some really valuable reforms. So the ethics question, of course, is a huge issue, and I think one of the ways that we can address that is with a constitutional convention. And there are some other issues as well. I'll think of those as time passes.
Well, I've got a list here, so I'm going to ask some of them, but let's go to Mr. Callaghan for at least his initial response and whether the state needs to hold a constitutional convention, why or why not.
Well, I understand that a lot of people have fears about the special interests controlling a constitutional convention. I understand the legislature has failed to address important issues like ethics reform. But I believe the legislature can make a difference with new people and new voices. Our elected officials are supposed to do what's right for the community, but it doesn't happen all the time. I want to change, or be part of the change in Rhode Island, in the legislature itself. And while I understand the cry for the Constitutional Convention, I think I want things to change at Smith Hill first. In any event, the convention, whatever happens there, has to go back to the legislature anyway. So it's sort of cyclical. And the convention would cost $1 million estimated for the state, and we don't really have the money to afford that. So I think it's time for the legislature to make decisions, to change, and do things what's right for the people of the state.
One of the issues that people do talk about if a constitutional convention is held is whether or not there should be term limits for members of the General Assembly, as there are now term limits for the state's constitutional officers. We'll start with you, Councilor Callaghan. Do you support term limits? If so, why or why not?
Yes, I think it's what we've done in the past hasn't worked. We've had legislators there for 40 years, 30 years, and it's just gotten worse and worse. So a term limit is not the worst thing. I think that a lot of times the voters give out term limits, but if there's a year, a few years, a limit, then there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's something that could change.
Mr. G?
I think, first, one question is, do we keep the legislature that we have in terms of its representation and its makeup, or do we consider a full-time legislature, or do we consider getting rid of all but about 20 legislators, have a unicameral approach to things, and thereby try to streamline the way we approach governing the state? We always seem to have a lot more of something than we need, especially when we compare to other states. So I think term limits is probably not a bad idea. And as we think about the term limits, think about some other measures to reduce the cost of government and get qualified, competent, good, honest people up there, please.
Another item that comes up in the discussion of a constitutional convention is having a line item veto authority for the governor. Currently, I believe 44 of the 50 states have a line item veto for the governor. Rhode Island is not among them. Mark G., do you favor a line item veto, and what do you think the benefit would be?
Yes, and I think the benefit would be the governor's ability to effectively do the right thing. Hopefully we've got the right governor in there, and having that line item veto will allow the rest of the budget to go through, but they'll have to go back and do some work on the items that are in contention.
Mr. Callaghan.
The governor's office in Rhode Island does not have a tremendous amount of power, and I think that a line item veto might give the governor a little more say in what happens, rather than just a bully pulpit. It might give a governor more incentive to pass legislation with the legislature that works for everyone, rather than just presenting a budget and seeing what happens. Because after it goes through, the legislature can just override the veto anyway. But with a line item, maybe it's a good thing to explore. I mean, what we've been doing in the past hasn't been working, so a change would be good.
Let's switch gears a little bit here. I think certainly in the 5 years I've been in Rhode Island, and we're going to go back to 38 Studios for a moment, but in a different vein, it is certainly the most controversial political decision that's been made in the 5 years I've been here, and it's certainly been the biggest political disaster and economic disaster that I think I've ever seen at a legislative level anywhere. What are your thoughts on economic development? I know the General Assembly, they changed the name from the Economic Development Corporation to the Rhode Island Commerce Corporation, and a lot of people said this is akin to putting lipstick on a pig. Would you keep the EDC or the Commerce Corporation as it is, or would you blow the thing up and start all over again? What are your thoughts about what needs to be done broadly in terms of economic development in the state, given where we are right now at the bottom of most national business rankings and on the heels of the 38 Studios disaster? And we're going to start with Councilor Callaghan.
Well, I find it disturbing, and I don't understand why, but we have a high tax rate, high tax burdens, but our bridges and roads are crumbling. We're spending all this money, and we're not getting anything in return. Better yet, we're still not funding our pension plans, or we weren't until a few years ago. So we have to have a dramatic change in the way we do business in Rhode Island. We have to capitalize on our tech industry, marine sciences, green energy, and high tech, because that's the future. We let our manufacturing jobs go away. We didn't do anything. We just sat there with our hands behind our back doing nothing. The Commerce Corporation, or the Commerce, whatever it's called now, it has a place. We have an economic development committee in Narragansett, and they're doing their best to move things along. But there was a proposal to get rid of it, and I was one of the 3 votes to keep it intact. And I think that there is a place for that. The 38 Studios debacle is just that, a debacle. And as a senator, I would do everything in my power to make sure that never happens again. I know Mr. Watson, the previous senator from East Greenwich, was one of the few, if not the only one, who spoke up against that. And Mr. Watson, although he's had some issues in the past, he's an intelligent guy. He spoke out against that. He had some guts, and I think I'd try to do the same when faced with a similar issue.
You're right. Bob Watson was the one member out of 113 in the General Assembly, only one, that voted against that loan deal. Let's go to Mark G. Your thoughts on the state's Economic Development Corporation, now the Commerce Corporation. There was a lot of discussion about getting rid of it and starting all over again. What would you do with regard to the agency and in terms of economic development in the state that we're not doing now?
Yes. Thank you, Bob Watson, first of all, for the courage to stand up and be a lone voice for your conscience and for doing what we now know in retrospect was the right thing. Too bad we didn't have more Bob Watsons who had the courage to stand up and say, wait a minute, this is not a good deal. And of course, he can do that for a few seconds, and then somebody cuts off his microphone, and oops, that's the end of that. As a business person, I am very nervous about empowering a group of people, some of whom may be business people, some of whom may not be business people, but giving them the power to give away state money to companies, businesses, organizations who want to come to Rhode Island. I think we've really got to be careful when we start chasing prospects to come to Rhode Island, to start throwing money at them in some form or another, whether it's tax incentives or tax stabilization agreements. I think I would want to get back to the basics. Let's forget about attracting new businesses. Let's take care of the businesses we have already. And let's lean down if we're going to keep the Commerce Corporation, because frankly, I'm not real impressed with the Commerce Corporation. They do a great job of blast emails telling you all the wonderful things that they do, but I never really get a final accounting of here's what we spent, here's what we offered, and here's what it's going to yield us. And do we operate the Commerce Corporation as a an organization that is a plus or a minus on the state budget. And I think we've got a way, as Mr. Callaghan says, we've got to take a global approach to this organization and what we want our economic development to be. But it's so easy to say, here, look, Commerce Corporation, go do your thing, and not hold them accountable and give them the power and the money to just go at it. I don't like that.
Mr. Callaghan, any rebuttal? Any other thoughts on the issue before we move on?
Well, the former EDC, they were given money by the legislature to give to 38 Studios. So I'm not sure if the Commerce Corporation has that much money at their disposal anymore. But like I said, I think there is a place for their services, and with the proper, people on that commission, I think they can do a good job.
Let me follow up on something Mr. G said and have you both respond. I've spent a lot of time in New York State in the last 4 years because my daughter went to college there. And of course, we see the ads on cable TV here. New York is the most aggressive state I've seen in the country in terms of trying to attract businesses. And they're up front. They said, we're going to give you 10 years tax abatement. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Come and open up business in New York. It seems like a very, not only aggressive approach, but, very media-centric in terms of trying to broadcast their message. I mean, should we be doing something similar here, whether it's tax incentives, but being on the airwaves in other states, being visible, trying to get people to come here? And we'll start with Mr. Callaghan.
Well, I think the key to our economy is jobs. Unless we have people working and paying taxes and working here and not leaving the state, then we don't have anything. If we have empty businesses, empty storefronts, empty factories, then we have lost. Unless we can attract other businesses from other states and keep the business we have here, we're going to be stuck in the same cycle. So I would consider tax-free zones or tax incentives or tax abatements for 3, 5, 10 years to bring new businesses in, because we're losing people fast, we're losing young people fast, and it's a shame because, like I said, I have family, friends, relatives, all have left the state because I can't find jobs. And unless we have companies who come in here to give jobs out and provide jobs, then we're not going to do not going to move forward. And I think we should use CCRI and URI and RIC as extensions of ways to improve job skills in Rhode Island, because I think that one of the issues that we have here is that the employees we do have don't have the job skills that some companies want. Whether it's engineering, high tech, computer tech, those things will attract companies. If we can use URI, RIC, and CCRI to have a co-op program to bring those businesses in, have internships, have programs for those students, then we'll have a better foundation for those kids and keep them here, keep our talent in state.
I know, Mr. G, you said you were more interested in trying to foster small businesses that are already here and help them grow rather than trying to attract businesses. And I know you stated your position on the tax forgiveness and so forth. What would you do to try and better the small business climate here in the state, if that's the way you think it's to grow jobs in Rhode Island?
I think it's very important that we send to Smith Hill honest individuals who are concerned about the real issues of the state and let go of this concept that we've got to bring back money to the district. We've got to give legislative grants to keep the faithful on board. First of all, I don't think Rhode Island has the resources that a New York State does to address certain problems. We're a finite organization with very, very, we don't have any resources, essentially. We have limited resources. And so, when I think of special programs to bring companies in here, I think of the infamous Providence P. I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars the Providence Chamber of Commerce spent on this Providence P. And I can remember going to a luncheon one time, and there were a bunch of Providence P hats on the table. And I thought, how much money did we spend on this? How much money did we spend on the P? How much money did we spend on the hat? Let's get rid of the crap and go to the heart of the problem. And that is, we need people in the State House and in state government that we can relate to and that we can converse with, who understand our problems and who can help us, like lower taxes, like get the bureaucrats off our business if we need a permit and so forth. These are just common sense things which, to me, should be the initial and the first things we've got to do. Then if we get to be so great that we can afford to spend, $1 million or $2 million to have somebody come in here, all right. But I don't think it's going to happen until we clean up our act. And I think we need some friendly attitudes toward business to do that.
Any parting closing thoughts, Mr. Callaghan?
Well, I think the statement that we don't have any resources in Rhode Island is a little bit of a mistake. I mean, we have tremendous universities. We have great companies like CVS, GTEC, Amgen. We have tourism. We have beaches. We have marine sciences. And we have our people. We do have a lot of resources that we can capitalize on. But we haven't done the best job of doing that yet. But that's something we should do. We can't think negative about ourselves all the time. It's not conducive to better things. And the resources we have here have to be capitalized on. And to say there aren't any here, I think is, not the attitude we need.
I want to raise a larger issue because both of you have touched on it, and that is the political culture in this state. We often hear it referred to as I know a guy. There's even some TV promotions doing that right now. I won't name the station. But in all seriousness, the political culture of the state, there are those, Mr. Callaghan, that say, look, the Democratic Party is 90% of the General Assembly. They dominate this state. They're the ones at fault that got us into this mess. So we need some new blood. We need more Republicans. And then Mr. G, I'm just paraphrasing what I hear from voters out there. People look at the Republican Party and say, this is just a disorganized mess. They can't get a critical mass of candidates. The Republican Party is only fielding, I think, in 37% of the General Assembly races. And so people say, well, we'd like an alternative, but that's necessarily the alternative we want. So I want you both to address the political culture of the state and how you might go to work to change that if elected to the Senate. We'll start with Mr. G.
Well, true to all of the above. We do have a lopsided legislature. It's I don't think any doubt that when you have a top-heavy legislature or an entire government that is essentially dominated by a single party, it eliminates a lot of fair and decision-making and a perspective which hopefully most other states have. I think that once again the key lies in the right people, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. I think we need honest people with a strong basis in ethical approach to what they do, and I'm not sure how you recruit people who are honest and people who you trust to do the right thing. And that, I guess, is that's the $64 question.
Councilor Callaghan?
Well, the ethics reform question in Rhode Island is simple. Anyone who doesn't want ethics reform at the State House is hiding from something or hiding something from us. We have to make that change. Until we do that, we're never going to move forward. We're never going to be looked at as an honest or ethical state and never attract business that wants to come here as a fair playing field. And you know what? Change in that respect and change overall in the state is going to come from the Democratic Party. Simple mathematics shows us there's not going to be a dramatic change in party leadership at the State House. Probably in my lifetime, and I don't know about yours. Our current senator here, Senator Hodgson, did his best. He was a good advocate, but I think he got frustrated because he couldn't get a lot of things done. You know what? I think Mr. G is a very charming guy. He's very persuasive, but I don't think that he's going to be able to get things done in the legislature because of the numbers. It's just a fact. Our state needs new voices, new leaders within the Democratic Party who are going to change things. I think I can be that voice. Additionally, I think we're going to have a new governor this year. I know we're going to have a new governor, and I think it's going to be a woman. And I think that when that person is elected and needs, some help in the legislature, she's not going to go knocking on Mr. G's door. I think that's just the way it is. But she might come knocking on mine, and I think I can help out the district and help out the state, and I believe I can be an advocate and a good voice for District 35.
Well, let me follow up a little bit on that because, given the political culture in the state, if you go to Smith Hill and try and implement ethics reforms and swim against the mainstream grain of the Democratic Party, you're going to get probably lousy committee assignments and a terrible office assignment, and they might just isolate you. You've said a number of things tonight that have struck me as that's going to be kind of rebellious against your own party. Can you
park in Pawtucket?
Yeah, and take the bus. Can you honestly succeed in doing that? Given the culture up there? I mean, look, people look at this, for example, this year with the beach contracts with different members of the General Assembly and the chairman of the state party and this deal they had to get the beach contracts. And I got to tell you, from talking to regular people every day, they just shrug their shoulders and go, well, that's Rhode Island as usual. That's just the way things work here. How can you counter that as a member of that party?
Well, I think that the recent primary results showed that the Democrats are in for a change. I think two or three of the endorsed Democrats did not win the recent primaries in the statewide elections. And I think that shows that people in Rhode Island are ready for a change. And I can't say that if I go up there, I'm going to be a whirlwind and lead the charge in 2 years. I don't think that's possible. Like, the Senate is a more deliberative body. But I think new people, new voices, a new generation of leadership has to come into play. And, unless you try, unless you make that effort, we shouldn't be running. And that's why I'm running, because I can complain about a lot of things, but unless you try to do something, you shouldn't be talking too much. And I'm trying to walk the walk and talk the talk. So that's my plan, and I'm going to do my best.
All right, Councilor G, we're going to give you the last word on this. And how do you do that as a small, weak minority party trying to forge the change that Mr. Callaghan's talking about?
Well, my esteemed colleague, I think, is right on when he says it's a leadership question. And it is a leadership question. What is leadership? How do you get people to empowered to feel like they've got the ability to make change happen? And there are a lot of different, it's interesting when you start to research or Google leadership, the different definitions that you come up with and the different approaches. Moral character is a strong underpinning of good leaders. And there are a lot of other things, but I think you need strong, grounded individuals who are willing to make sacrifices in order to lead. And by make sacrifices, I don't mean make deals. I mean to accept the fact that you're going to do the best you can, and not let disappointment stop you from completing what you want to do. It can be an endless, thoughtless job. And having served in the military and received some great training on leadership, you learn that there are many ways to skin a cat. And so strong leadership, I think, is the answer to the question, which I forgot. So.
Well, you raised another question, and the issue of leadership, and I've always been a big believer that leadership is easy to, when you're on a campaign and you've got your positions on various issues, and it's easy to spit them out on television or in front of the press or in front of an audience. The thing that has always struck me about leadership is when the unexpected happens, when an issue crops up that 3 months ago wasn't an issue, and all of a sudden you're forced as a leader to take a position and try and handle a crisis that nobody saw coming down the tracks. And I think you guys probably know where I'm going with this. The big issue now in all the political races is, should there be an international travel ban on people coming from West Africa to the United States, especially given that Rhode Island has one of the highest populations of Liberian Americans in this nation. So we'll start with Mr. Callaghan. Do you favor an international travel ban? And talk a little bit about what you think the state might be doing right or wrong or adequately in terms of this Ebola crisis that's suddenly upon us.
Well, I think that we should prepare for an eventual Ebola case in Rhode Island. We should probably have a hospital that's dedicated, or a wing or an area of a hospital dedicated for that eventuality. I think that's one of the issues that happened in Dallas, that they didn't prepare exactly well for what was coming up. It'll cost a lot of money. I mean, it'll be an investment, but I think that's something we should do. As for the travel ban, I'm not sure exactly where I stand on that, quite frankly, because I think if we ban travel from, I'm not sure if it means ban travel from a certain area or from, Spain, England, Germany, because a person can go from where the issue is to a different place and fly in from there. So I understand the hysteria and the issues. It's on the news constantly, but I don't exactly know how to approach a travel ban right now. I have to think about that more.
Okay, Mr. G, your thoughts on the topic?
Once again, we seem to have lost direction. There's no leadership on this issue. Even the president seems to have made a few missteps in handling this thing. Geez, we need somebody who can stand up there, make a decision, and implement it. Yeah, you can make wrong decisions, but you can adjust course along the way. The issue of travel is, and I agree with James, it's very difficult. One thing they say is, well, you don't want to impose a travel ban because what's going to happen is people are going to skirt it, they're going to take alternate ways to get into the country, and you're not going to be able to enforce it. Is that what's going to happen? Well, I don't know. Maybe if you instituted it in such a way that you maximize the limitation of spreading the disease, maybe it would work. I agree. I'm not an expert on medical issues, but I wish I'd like to see better leadership. You hear Michael Fine, the health director, talking about things. We don't hear from him anymore. I don't know what happened. And I don't know what Governor Chafee's got to say about the issue. So somebody's got to step up and take charge so that we solve the nurses' crisis. They're afraid that they haven't been properly trained, and it certainly sounds like they haven't been. So let's not go making statements that we're number one, we're ready to go, and so that have no basis in fact.
Let's move on to another issue that's of concern to Rhode Islanders, one of our biggest concerns, and that's education reform. I'll let you talk about any thoughts you have on education, period, but specifically I'd like to answer the question, do you think that Rhode Island should maintain a standardized test to measure student progress and achievement, such as the kneecap, and should it be a graduation requirement? And this time we start with Mr. G.
Yes. I think we should set high standards. This is one of the things that I'm not an expert in education, but I am very frustrated that we've spent so much time and so much money and have so little to show for it, whereas Massachusetts, for instance, addressed the problem early on, but to do so, they had to spend a lot of money. So once again, we've got the trade-off of the MCAS, which poured a ton of money into the early learning situation and essentially gave students a leg up on learning. Do we have those kinds of resources in Rhode Island? Well, that's a legislative function. The legislators are in charge of our education system, and I think Deborah Guest had the right idea, but we've got to maintain high standards, and if we can adopt another state's successes, MCAS or whatever it is, we've got to do it. Once again, it's I don't want to harp on this, but it's the leadership, and I think Deborah Gist has done a good job.
And you would keep her or support her staying?
I definitely would.
Okay.
I think she's a dedicated, honest educator. I don't know where the missteps have come with the teachers who are balking at having an evaluation system. Every job I've ever had, starting with the U.S. Navy, you go in for a 6 months evaluation. It's you sit down with your supervisor, whether it's your division officer, your operations head, and ultimately the captain, and you get rated on a bunch of categories, but essentially simple categories. And it's a positive experience generally for the person who's being reviewed, but we don't take offense if our supervisor says, well, you fell down in this area and you need to do this to improve. Well, okay,
right.
You can either agree or disagree. And I think if we implement it correctly, teachers can learn that an evaluation is not a criticism. It's a way to make things better for everyone.
Okay. I'm going to let Mr. Callaghan answer this and have the last word on the issue, and then we want to get to the closing statements because it is, I'm the timekeeper tonight, it's 6:54, and he has a council meeting he needs to get to in Narragansett. So, Mr. Callaghan, your thoughts on the kneecap, and should we keep it or something like it, and should it be a hard and fast graduation requirement?
Well, I think I do support the Common Core. I support the testing and the performance of our students because it does involve a new approach, and any new approach is going to have its ups and downs. But the fact of the matter is the majority of Rhode Island students rank in the middle of the road nationally in both reading and math. And nationally or internationally, we're not much better. We have to improve in reading, math, and science. And the testing, it does give us a measuring stick of where we are. Whether it should be a requirement for the graduation, probably not. I don't think that's the case, but I do support the implementation of new standards because we have to change things. We have to move forward because what we've been doing in the past has left us, behind. We have to get better, and that's the way to do it. And I think that we have to change the way we fund our school building projects. We don't have any new building funding for our schools, and we haven't had for years. It's a moratorium. In Massachusetts, they use a portion of their sales tax. They dedicate that to a trust for school building. And if we do something like that, almost like an enterprise fund, then we can make sure that our schools get built. Because if they're falling apart, there's no foundation for our students and their learning. And I think that an issue here in East Greenwich is the full-day pre-K or K kindergarten program, and I do support that. They have it in Narragansett, in South Kingston, but not in North Kingston and East Greenwich. I think it costs about $350,000. And again, back to what I said before, if we're going to incentivize through the state towns to save money in some places, we can add money other places. And kids, they're what we're all striving for their success. And I think if we have schools that are safe, schools that are performing highly, we're only going to better ourselves in the future.
All right, let's go to our closing statements now. And since Mr. G got to go first in the opening statements, I'm going to let Mr. Callaghan begin, and we'll give you 90 seconds each on these, and we'll be done.
Thank you, Mr. Curtis, and thank you to the EG News and New England Tech, Mr. Lombardi, and Ms. McNamara for having us here, and all the people coming out tonight. It's nice to see. Unfortunately, we have neglected the future of our great state. We have mortgaged our future on bad bets. At the same time, we've let our taxes run high while our infrastructure crumbles. The days of short-sighted decision-making and insider politics has to end. As a former prosecutor and now president of the Narragansett Town Council, I've been able to make difficult but prudent decisions that benefited our citizens today and tomorrow. In the past 2 years, we saved the town over $42 million in other post-employment benefit savings. And we kept the tax rate low and made strides to improve the quality of life for our residents. I want the opportunity to do the same for District 35. Our legislature needs a new voice for a new generation. Only when we have that will we begin to move forward. Just as in the state budget, the numbers in the legislature do not lie. A change in party leadership on the State House is not on the horizon. Any real change is going to come from within. And I'm running because I think I can help make that change happen. I want choice and opportunity for our children, things that should be simple, to drive on safe roads and bridges, to attend first-class public schools, including full-day kindergarten, and the opportunity to stay in Rhode Island and raise a family. For too long, that has been missing. Through intelligent reform, a new way of doing business, and strong ethics legislation, we can get Rhode Island back on the right track. Again, thank you to everyone for having us here tonight. It's been a pleasure, Mr. G, as always, and I respectfully ask for your vote on November 4th to move Rhode Island forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Callaghan. Mr. G, your closing statement.
Well, thank you for coming, everyone that's here. Thank you for your courtesy and politeness, Mr. Callaghan, and all the sponsors involved. Let's lay it on the line. We live in the ocean state. It's the best when we're on top of the water, but we're underneath the water now, and it's our government that's holding us down. We need people in the General Assembly and government who understand and live business, and who run businesses which drive the economic engines we need to get our employment and economy back on track. It's going to take leadership, teamwork, patience, foresight, time, and a spirit of cooperation, and an iron will to make it happen and follow through. Decisive leadership, imagination. The status quo must go. Rhode Island government is broken, and we need honest, ethical, real leadership to fix it. That's why I'm here. Let's go, little Rhodey. Let's get to work.
Mr. G, thank you. Again, both of our candidates, James Callaghan, the Democrat, Town Councilor in North Kingstown, or Narragansett, I'm sorry, and Mark G, the Republican, the Town Councilor here at East Greenwich. Two well-qualified candidates. I thank you both for this engaging discussion. I know Mr. Callaghan has to get to a meeting, and so I'm just going to close again thanking EG News, East Greenwich News for sponsoring this, the East Greenwich Chamber of Commerce, the East Greenwich Rotary Club, and the folks here at New England Tech. And on behalf of everyone at ABC6, and we do have a camera here tonight, so it'll be on the news again tonight. Thank you, and don't forget to vote on Election Day, November 4th. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you.